Header Footer Gallery and this podcast are part of the New Media Caucus, an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars. Recognizing new media art to be inherently interdisciplinary, multimodal, and evolving, we support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution in the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership, to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address, both within the caucus and in our field.
Welcome everyone to the 12th episode of our third season of Header Footer Presents. I'm your host Renee.
And I'm your co-host Constanza.
In this episode of Icebreaker, we will be talking with this year's keynote speaker for the New Media Symposium, Regeneration Paula Gaetano Adi.
Awesome. So Paula Gaetano Adi is an Argentine interdisciplinary artist working in robotics, video, and performance. Gaetano Adi's robot Alexithymia was awarded the first prize in the international competition Vida, Art and Artificial Life, and the first prize Limbo by the Museum of Modern Art of Buenos Aires. Her Mestizo Robotics long-term project has been distinguished with Fundación Telefónica's Award for Ibero-American Artists, and she was awarded with the Creative Capital Award in 2023 for her project Guanaquerex, winner of the 2025 Ars Electronica Golden Nika in the category Artificial Life and Intelligence. She is also a former fellow at Argentina's National Endowment for the Arts, the Center for Research in Engineering, Media, Performance at UCLA, and Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute's MPAC. She currently lives between San Juan, Argentina, and Providence, Rhode Island, where she is Professor of Experimental and Foundational Studies in Computation, Technology, and Culture at the Rhode Island School of Design. So thank you so much for having us and welcoming you here today for this episode, Paula.
Thank you guys for having me and for the opportunity to chat with you and to give my talk at the symposium this year.
Yes, you must be so excited, of course, right? So I guess I wanted to start off with one of the first times I ever found out about your work. I was during my PhD program with Maria Fernandez, which I don't know if you met or know of her, right? She's a big, thing in like new media art. And the first project I came across from yours was the Alexithymia, actually. And so, which to me was very interesting, very different from seeing a lot of like the robotics that have been developed, today. And so a lot of the works were very new in terms of like the material being used, right? Mud, for instance, or fleshy mediums, of course. And I think it really challenges our associations with cold, the sleek, the mechanical aspects of technology that we have today. But I guess one of the first questions that I have for you, and looking at this trajectory and body of work that you've created, right, is how did you begin with robotics and how did you end up from, pursuing this discipline and this in this industry and moving towards more fleshy, more organic materials in robotics design as well?
Wow, thank you for that question. Yes, I know Maria. Of course, we've been in conversation over the years, and she has been a great supporter, I guess, from, as a scholar to support my work and write about my work. So I always appreciated her vision about my work. And I'm glad she's showing into the classes and everything. So Alexithymia, I think it's interesting that you bring that because it's a work that is often brought up as if it was something new, and it's actually a very old piece. It was I did it 2005, 4, I think. This is now it feels like really long time ago, and I was very, very young. I was actually right out of college, but immediately knew that I wanted to work in robotics in that sense. After I thought of conceptualized that work and created that work, but not. I guess it was more of like an unconscious decision then, and then later became a very much more conscious decision about working within robotics and what that field might entail. as an artistic practice. So I guess the beginning of how I started with that, the questions that were around alexithymia were, up to that moment, I was working a little bit on performance. And like I don't have a background in fine arts at all. It was more in media studies, and so I was kind of interested in questions about the body, embodiment. And so eventually I was starting to do these performances in which, I would work around like, prosthetic devices and technology sort of applied to the human body, right? And then eventually, I think right at the beginning, the question was, well, what if instead of thinking about creating, like thinking about the human body in relation to technology, what if I create a completely artificial body? And that question, which was innocent at that point of like creating an artificial body, it really brought me to robotics. And so my question in robotics is really started about the body and embodiment as opposed to artificial intelligence, which is what you would imagine. And maybe that translation started from there, right? So from the beginning, my question was about artificial corporality instead of artificial intelligence, and then how those things are related to each other and how those things inform each other and how our embodiment, our physicality in the world is what actually makes us intelligent, right? And so starting to understand notions of intelligence that were directly related to the body. And so I started to do this like very simple robots, which will represent, and like in the case of alexithymia, for those that don't know, is a robot that only sweats when people touch it, right? And I think at that point it was what I wanted it to do is remove any other kind of behavior. And in robotics, you think a lot about behavior, right? Robotics says think about what is the behavior of this robot, not only the goal, which is obviously sort of the drives of creating this machine, these kind of machines, but also like the behavior. In that case, I wanted to remove all kinds of behaviors that, that are represented with these ideas of intelligence that mostly had to do with language, verbal language. And I wanted to start to duplicate, create, or how do you say it? Like design a kind of behavior that was like that humans do without conscious decisions, right? Like, but that doesn't mean it's not intelligent, right? Our body sweats under certain circumstances, so it is a very intelligent behavior, but it's not mediated with all these ideas of intelligence that we normally think. And so that's kind of how I started. And also because I was very interested in this relationship between the work, the interaction, very conscious about having a viewer interacting with this work and sort of establishing a different kind of relationship with my viewer, right? In which, at this point, this is early 2000, a lot of the interactive work that we're seeing is it were calling for a very particular kind of action from the viewer, and I was really wanted a different kind. The fact that getting involved with touch, with care, we're getting close to this being, and so in that sense, sort of crafting the robot is crafting a being and not just a machine. And so how this viewer will relate to this, right? And so very conscious about the decisions of interaction, I would say.
That's incredible because your other work, Anima, right, from 2009, that is the one that breathes, right? So you have one that perspires, you have one that breathes. And I find your work so interesting because when we talk about technology and robotics, it's very sleek, efficiency, intelligent, right? And AI especially, or at least we have these impressions of these things as such. But if you're focused on corporeality and embodiment, you start thinking about soft intelligence or like, soft structures. And then that goes into the mediums that you choose, like fleshy skin or mud, for instance, and some other works that you use as well. So we can get into that a little bit more, but I'm curious, Rene, do you have something also? Yeah.
So yeah, about this, like you mentioned something really interesting, and I noticed it in like several of your works, right? You talked about performance, that it is a performance, this body that sweats, right? And a lot of my research lately has been focused on what is performance in virtual spaces, but that also has had like outputs into what is a performer, right? Can you have a performer that is not embodied? And by embodied, I don't mean like it has a physical body, but more like it has a person or a living agent behind it, right? So things like AI, when I say AI, I don't mean like LLMs. I mean more like artificial intelligence in the context of, for example, video games. So these things that you program, they have like certain behaviors, but they do have to react in ways that are not always predicted. So one of the things that I've been thinking is, if you break the rules of a performer, like of a digital performer, like an NPC, for example, and you make it so it cannot produce its traditional functions or the functions or the behaviors that you mentioned, it, in my opinion, it becomes like a complete performer, right? So do you see this kind of thing in the works in anima, for example, in sorry, in alexithymia? Do you see those behaviors? Do you think they act as actors, or do you just think of performance because to the viewer it's a performance?
No, no, I do think about the behavior a lot. I do see them more so than performers. I see them as beings, artificial, of course, but and so because of
Mhm.
that, I give them agency. I do think of them as agents. For the longest, I wouldn't call them robots. I'll call it autonomous agents or things like that, right? Because I do think that, and because I'm giving them agency, I do think that their behavior, which it can manifest in different ways, in the case of these two works that we're talking about, in a very kind of bodily way,
Mhm.
and I mean, I would say body behaviors that we've seen in other animals, right? They're human animals or animals, right? And so there
Yeah.
is that relationship, and so that's why I see them. But I don't think them as performers, but I do think them as acting or behavior, and
Mm.
that's actually the only thing that I could do as an artist. Like I feel like I've said this before in work, like the only thing that I do in this kind of like I did with this work is actually modeling behaviors, or that's the creative output of my work, right? And so, okay, I'm gonna do a robot that sweats. I'm gonna do a robot that breathes. And so what that it starts with that. It starts with the behavior, which you could think of it as a performance, right? And from there, all the other decisions come after that decision. Um, so,
Mhm.
if it's fleshy, if it's soft, if it's low in height, if it's huge, everything comes after that
Mm.
decision, which is a behavioral decision. And it might not be true for other works, but it's true for these ones, which were my first robotics work, which I was really trying to go against or think with roboticists and how they are creating their machines. And they really think about the behavior. So you have to think about, okay, this robot is going to dig a hole. And so then all those decisions come. So, but my question was like, what if we present a different kind of behavior or a different kind of goal? So all the other decisions are dictated by that in a way, right?
Yes. Which takes me to a second question, because you mentioned animals and the human animal, right? And then obviously the way that I became familiar with your work is with
Mm-hmm.
guanacoex.
Mm-hmm.
And the guanaco, if you don't know, like listeners, if you don't know what a guanaco is, it's kind of like a llama, but it's thinner. I think it's a little bit funnier looking. Um, they have that haircut that all the teenager boys have now, the broccoli haircut. Really funny animals. Anyways, and this animal robot creature being is meant to move through mountainous
Mm-hmm.
terrain, right? And in a way, it's a connection to the traditional use of the guanaco in the region. It's also an exercise in pathfinding and walking and all these things, right? Is that correct? Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a robot that we made so to cross the Andes. And it's
Mhm.
the guanaco, and in this case, for example, that's what I'm saying is different. Like guanaco shape thinking idea came much later than the actual
Mm.
goal, which was creating the first robot that would be crossing the Andes. That was the premise. And then the shape or the form of a guanaco started to come to me much later in the process. And it was kind of in the process of talking to the community, in the process of actually being in the territory. And so guanacos, the difference with the llama is mostly because there is the region where they are. So if you think about in South
Ah,
America, you have llamas, guanacos, and vicuñas, which are the camelids from South America. Like you think Bolivia and Peru, they have llamas. South, in South Argentina and Chile, you start having guanacos and vicuñas. So it's also a
mm,
territorial thing. Llamas are domestic, guanacos and vicuñas are not. That's another difference. And so in the territory where we
Mm.
actually deployed our robot, it's full of guanacos. And that's the animal that is the only mammal that can live at high altitudes, much higher than even llamas. And so, there's a lot of mythologies around guanacos in the area. So that's why I never did, as you know, if you've seen my work, anything that looks like anything, right? They're usually balls, blobs, or things like that. Um, but in this particular project, because it was a community very involved and because of the territory and the attachment to the territory, I thought I needed a figure that could be also relatable. They could people. So there
mm,
was some kind of like sense of me needing that.
Yeah.
And of course, it wouldn't be a humanoid cross in the Andes because that would be totally that would be just too much for me. um, and then that's how it started. And it also started because we needed a four-leg creature because we were building a
mm.
quadruped robot, and so we needed those four legs. And then working with the materials, we realized the decision of working with the bamboo cane, which is not bamboo, it's Coligüe cane, but doesn't matter. It looks like a bamboo cane. Then the material we were like, okay, what could we do with this material, right? So a lot of exploration then related to materials, which it always happened, right? It's a back and forth
Mhm.
between the idea, the materials, the place, and all of that.
Yes.
Going
So,
back to the
oh,
materials. No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go
No, no,
ahead.
no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just wanted to pinpoint this idea of the materials themselves, right? You have the Mestizo robotics, right? That you also did this collaboration that you did with Gustavo Krembo. And again, it has to do with the embodied and community aspects of technology, but it was also made out of clay or mud, if I remember correctly, right? And
Mm-hmm,
I love
mm-hmm,
your
mm-hmm.
discussion about how you start with a very, I don't want to say basic, but very fundamental idea of a behavior that you want to model. And then the rest sort of comes with it, right? The medium itself, like what it's going to look like. And so it's really interesting seeing your process behind all this. I guess one of my questions that I have for your entire body of work is because you deal so heavily with behavior, right? And that's very integral to robotics and creating these artworks. How do you account for randomness or unpredictability in the behaviors of these robots, for example?
Well, it's a good question because at the end it's everything about that. So then you remove
Hmm.
the sort of the cause effect sort of or the action reaction that some of these interactive works could end it up. And so I do expect that. So to me, it's like, okay, there is a behavior as of like what is going to show to our viewer, how is it going to engage, which through which behavior it can engage, right? Is it talking, is it walking, is it breathing? But then after that, I allow that moments of randomness to happen, which is what happens in real communication, right? When there is not a back and forth, that is very predictive. I also, for that same reason, I guess, I use nonverbal language. I do think that nonverbal
Hmm.
language, because verbal language is not the only language, allows for this kind of randomness, ambiguity, and also allows for different kind of relationship with these things. And so that's also why I'm like very keen about not using verbal language in the way that the robots will interact with the viewer. because I'm interested in this, what you said. I mean, you call it randomness, I think, right? And that's that I think that's real life. Like that's actually when an interaction becomes real, when
Right.
are things that I didn't expect it as a creator, right? And also as an interactor with these things. And I always do that. So when it depends on which, like some, like Alexandria and Anima, they're interactive in the sense that they have sensors and they can interact in that sense. And so, but then how people interact, because it's touch, for example, it's super different. Like little kids interact in
Of
one way,
course.
older people interact another way. With the breathing, it was also very interesting. And but the mad robots are not so much of interactive in the sense, in the technology, in the technological sense that they don't have sensors. And for many reasons, but one is that I want people to think that they're being censored, but they're not. The robot is doing whatever it wants to do, and it doesn't have much more of a perception of the environment, other than just, what it can do physically. If you bump into the balls and you want to push it, yeah, it's going to react because of the weight, but not necessarily because it has a sensor. And I think those decisions are the artistic decisions, right? That's where we can intervene there, and it's like to making that. But I do think that that kind of those are the elements with which we can create.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of Simon Penney's project Petite Mal. It's I'm sure you know of this one too. It's like this little robot that doesn't really do much other than interacts or engages with the viewer. And so it's works like these that are very exciting to me, because the moments where there's unpredictability or randomness, that's where you really find opportunity to engage and interact with the audience, right, in different ways too. So I love that for
Otherwise, you
robots as
lose
well.
them. I mean, I always see, like, how people, if they understand the logic of how it's working, they leave. They don't get engaged. They just,
Exactly.
and I learned this. I mean, I learned this by, when I did anime, I was very young, and that was my first work and everything. And so what I did, which was kind of crazy now to think, is I put a camera in exhibitions and record for hours what people were doing with the work for nothing. I just did it
Uh-huh.
because I wanted to understand what was happening. It was kind of like an anthropological sort of study. And that taught me a lot. I mean, that
Absolutely.
lesson of me putting the camera hidden, right? Like people didn't know there was a camera. It was just me looking at this footage for hours to trying to understand. Because I know that when the artist is there, people behave very differently. And so that's why I did that. And that, taught me a lot about interaction.
Yeah. I mean, this idea of giving like agency in a way and mobility and reactivity to robots has been like always like this desire in humans. Like you have the mechanical Turk is like this famous con. It is a con, right? Like
Yeah.
it was a person inside of it, right? Yeah.
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 Which, if you think about it, it really reflects this whole situation right now with Waymos, where it turns out that they're actually piloted by people in Indonesia. But going back to what is, I also remember this robot from it was called Yamandini by Velonaki, Mari Velonaki. It's this really tall. It was 3D printed, but it looks like marble, right? And it's the height of a normal human, and it moves around a gallery, but it has this ability to develop affinities and dislikes. So it will scan the space, and based on certain behaviors of the people, it will attach itself to someone or avoid someone. So if it doesn't like you, it will like go away from you. But if it's attracted to you, it will move towards you, and it'll shadow you. And it really, because I saw it in person, it was really weird because you're standing and you know how you feel like someone is behind you. I don't know how an
Mhm.
object can generate that same feeling, because I always thought it was something about the person, right?
Human beings.
Yeah, about like maybe something we barely perceive, like their breath or something. And no, you have this silently moving thing behind you, and you turn around and it's like right, it's like a jump scare. But it is this interesting behaviors that she obviously created, and I think I see a lot of similarities between your work and Maribel Onaki's, particularly now that you're mentioning these robots. And I also was thinking, and I want to know more about what are they named? Hold on, because I have this here. They're like the balls that
Mestizo robotics.
yeah, exactly. That one. I wanted to hear a little bit about those, because they're the least familiar well, no, the anima is also very non-human shaped, and but it still retains certain degrees of humanity, where these ones, I think you made them on purpose not to be human in any form, way, or manner, right?
Yeah, they're the less humanoids of all, I would say. Well, I think the exploration was a different one, in the sense that that was kind of like a little bit of a shift, I would say, a very deliberate shift in a way, and it was like the idea of trying to work with other materials that were not necessarily the ones that we normally see in robotics or in robotics development. Even though animals do it because they're soft, you would see them, but there's still a lot of soft robotics research out there. But robotics with materials like mud, like grass, like organic materials like that, it's they're less popular in a way. And what I was, I guess, with Gustavo, who was my collaborator in that project, we actually were trying to understand and see how we could use these materials, our traditional materials that have that are being used, for example, I mean, at least in South America, but I would say general in the global South as construction materials. Materials are incredibly smart, and that you could how those could be applied or thought or repurposed in robotics. And so that's how that idea of the mestizo robotics started, originally as a series of robots, but then it became this more collaborative project between different communities and how they would approach the making with mud, because mud, you can approach it in many different ways. Our original one was done with quincha, which is this technique of architectural construction, let's say. But then, mud could be used as clay, it could also be used as ceramics. And so we sort of approached the same project using different kind of technique with mud, and that was certainly the starting point. That's why it ended up being called Mestizo Robotics as the general project, as making a very clear designation of a way of a practice that is maybe drawn from critical mestizaje, right? Maybe drawn with these ideas of not necessarily mestizaje in the sense of race, which obviously has that connotation, but also as a practice of making that we don't think is necessarily something from the past, but it's actually a way of making in which high technologies, let's say robotics technology and low technologies, ancestral technologies, or craft technologies are intertwined and they're happening at the same time. And so we're kind of like bringing together those worlds and seeing them like interact in a way.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say, the material, I always go back to the materials themselves and how, especially mestizo robotics, right? They very much focus on the embodied knowledges of, like you were saying, ancestral knowledges, all these epistemologies also, right? South American mestizaje too. But I'm curious to know a little bit more about, because mestizo robotics is one of the ones that I started noticing more of a community aspect of thinking through technology, right? Kind of like how you were talking about Guanaquerix as well, right? When did that start? That moment where you said you wanted to really embark on this journey of collaboration with communities themselves in the materials, right? in the vision, in the process behind them.
Mm-hmm. It was there. It was in Mestizo Robotics when it started, but it was not a deliberate decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had the project, we had gotten a grant to do the project, and we knew we want to work with Matt or clay. Gustavo, it's really an expert in clay, and so we were like was trying to do that, and eventually we realized we wanted to do in quincha as a technique, and then we decided to go to this community in the Amazon, in the Peruvian Amazon, where most of the houses are constructed in that technique, with that technique. And so we're like, why don't we just like go there and learn how could we build it, right? And so and learn with them. And when we were there, actually more of like just to build the robot and learn the technique, we spent a month there. And then we realized that, so we developed the first robot there. And then we realized because our engagement with the community was so strong, even without us going for that at all, we realized that because this was a series of robots, the original project, that we would not do it anymore that way. And that we would do it if there was a community ready to engage in the conversation. And so we left that robot there. We finished it, we plastered it, we did the whole thing, and then we left it there and realizing that, okay, that kind of like belonged there and hoping that we would develop more. And so that's that's how it started. And it felt much more honest in the way that it was not us just going and learning that technique and coming back. But I think it was not even it was not even an extractive thinking. It was more like, oh, let's go there for a month. Let's learn how this. And then the engagement was so crucial with the school, with the kids at school, because the community was very, very small. We're talking about like, I don't know how many people, but like 200 people. It was a very remote place. And so our presence there was huge because we were in the middle of the town in the plaza working because there was no other space where we could work. And so we just started to engage with everyone in the town. And so then the conversations about it, about what it meant to be doing a robot there, it was certainly very far from their ideas of robots. So we engaged a lot with the children in the community. And then we realized that we were into something different than just making our clay robot, right? Which was the original idea. And we were into like making a robot or a project, I would say, that it was very dialogical. And then that it was maybe a conversational piece. Gustavo will call it like that. It's like maybe this is a conversational piece. This is a piece that we bring as a proposal and to start a conversation about these issues, about materials and about ideas of technologies, and so that's how it really evolved. And then the other versions were done in like mostly universities who were interested in having this conversation with us and with students. And that's how it evolved, and that's why we don't call it like a closed project.
Right.
If you see the website, it's still like it's ongoing. Yes, we haven't done a rescue robots in a while, but we think it's still, the question is still very valid. It's still open, and we're always open to have this kind of like people appropriating the idea of the mestizo robots and doing something with it.
Allowing for discourse, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
It's also really interesting because in Mesoamerican, so like Mexico, Guatemala, all these regions, the idea of clay and humans is very, very linked together in that they're like the failed humans, right? It's these trial humans or human 1.0 that break and then they decide to go with corn. But also working with artists in Mexico, one of the things I noticed is like the clay keeps coming up all the time. I work with this woman artist. She is from a small community in Oaxaca, and one of the things they do is they build shelters out of the corns, the corn cobs while they're harvesting, and that's where they rest while they're harvesting. Once it's done, they take them away. But what she was thinking is that it's a house, it's a construction. So what she did is she created corn husks out of, corn, it's maize, the actual corn, and made out of clay, but embedded pieces of significant objects from the community that people donated to her. And the idea is that as they crumble through the passage of time, they would expose this relationship. So clay has a lot of connection. It's the first thing that we use to make vessels. It's the first thing that we use to represent humans, right? So I do think that it's a very strong relationship with materials, but it's also a material that we move out of as civilizations, right? It's perceived less and less as a valid thing, to the point that ceramic work has to be recontextualized nowadays in the art world to make it valuable again, because for a long time it was like, oh, it's just, crafts. So combining that with robotics, it's a really strong statement, I believe, in what you're doing. And then the layering of the mestizo, which is a very complex word. It's a very charged word in some cases, particularly in Latin America in general, Mexico specifically in the 1930s. It became a very, very charged word. But trying to take it away from that, I think it's very, very valuable. And I also have to question, like, for example, the word robot itself, because if you know, like, it means servant, but like slave, basically. So
The Czech word.
yeah, the Czech word.
Yeah.
Robota or robota.
Robota.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always these implications in the language and the way that we interact with things that we have to constantly be reevaluating. So, and I think that your work kind of invites that type of thinking of recontextualizing what it means to be a robot, what it means to be alive in a way, and in a way, the materials that you use achieve this, which makes it really, really, really interesting. Do you have another questions on the work, or do you want to ask something different? Do you want to move to a different subject, Connie?
What I was thinking throughout this discussion is this idea of the instrumentalization that happens with technology, and the definition of technology as instrumental or as a tool-based thing, right? And we're here talking with Paula, whose body of work is doing something quite different, right? It's very embodied, it's very community-based. And so this brings me to mind your Robocalyptic Manifesto. That's the one, the Technopolitics for Liberation, which is a video essay. I'm curious to know where this manifesto comes from, right? How can we reimagine technology differently? What is the vision of, for the future and our relationship with technology that is not instrumentalized, right? In such a way that we have, that we're living currently today, which is so different from what your visions of technology want us to think about, I guess.
Well, that's a big question, I would say. But I mean, just going back to what Renee was saying, I think there are a few things that I think we could tie with that is the idea of the failed human as the first like mad mad human, let's say, from the Popol Vuh, for example. Yeah, that was absolutely very conscious decision. And it was the starting point of this project, thinking on creationist mythologies, as robotics somehow always been linked with some kind of creationist mythologies, often Western, often Greco-Christians. And so the point was like, what if we start looking at a different starting point? What if we look at the different kind of narratives of creating with Mad the first man, right? The golem, the Pygmalion, and all of that. And so that's how we kind of like look at the Popol Vuh, which was beautiful when they thought it was the fail version. So we didn't want to do the perfect one. We did not do the corn one. We did the mad one. Really thinking about that, the idea of maybe a failure. Something to embrace in that sense. And if we're thinking about duplicating the human, which seems to be the ultimate goal of robotics as a meta, like, as a meta goal, creating a double of the human.
Yeah.
But which human, one can ask? Who's human, right? What humanity? And it's very clear, and that's how I guess the manifesto you were talking about, Connie, started with that particular question, the question of the human. And I think my work eventually started to shift from these kind of questions that were more specific to robotics to questions about the human. And going back to the word robot as a slave, for example. And so what the manifesto does is actually a question about who are we trying to duplicate, or how are we trying to replicate the human, and what ideas of humanities we have that we are translating in robotics, right? Or in robots. And so it seems to be that it was a very interesting, what's happened is something kind of um, crazy, which is something that we do. And so robotics to me becomes very clear example of how we instrumentalize certain humans, and who is instrumentalizing
Absolutely.
them. And so in robotics are kind of like a double of the other than human, meaning other than man. This white man that it's designating who are less than human, right? And robots fall into that narrative as less than humans, and they're a creation of man to service men, like any other, I would say, subjugated entity, right? Like children, women, slaves, people of color, immigrants, you name it, right? But what is very interesting or weird is that they are doing it so to be intelligent. The other ones are not intelligent somehow, but the robots are, because they're embedding this kind of logic that is very. So I think so. There's all these questions that the manifesto is doing, right? And so by showing certain kinds of robots that we see from science fiction, which I think is what is feeding our imagination of robots in science fiction still, even though we can get inspired and we get ideas from actual robotic development. At least for the last few years, it was science fiction, the big place where we draw ideas about robots. I think lately the technology has developed enough so we could see these military robots being actually actualized, and so it doesn't feel like anymore like a fantasy. It's just starting to feel a little bit more real. But up to a few years, the whole idea of robotics was something from science fiction. It started there with a play and continued in cinema for a century. And so what are these ideas that we're carrying from science fiction to reality? That's kind of also a question that the manifesto does. So that's why I call it manifesto, robocalyptic manifesto, because the idea that robots are driving the apocalypses. I guess the question that the manifesto does is, what if we think it otherwise? Like, what if we think this apocalypses, what if we rephrase the idea of apocalypses, right? Or what if we actually make these robots? They are just destroying these ideas of the apocalypses as as we have seen, right, so far. So I don't know if that explains a little bit, but
no, it does. It also brings me to this topic of the cosmotechnics, right? Which has been an ongoing discussion about among many artists and like philosophers as well. And this joining of how do we think technology for a different end, right? And for the people and for it to serve the communities that it actually makes it disadvantageous for, right? For example, right? Those who exploit. So how do we serve those communities instead? So it's about thinking more globally, more embodied, right? Aspects of that. And that's how I see your guanaquetics and your robocalyptic manifesto as well. That was a hard one. But I guess the one last question that I have before, if you have other questions, Renee, is what other projects are you seeing in the future that you're currently in the middle of producing or in imagining, right, as well? And how has it changed from your initial works? Because you already sort of told us your trajectory of it, right? But I guess I'm curious what your future projects look like right now, if you are able to disclose such information.
Yeah, it's never a secret, but I'm a very slow maker. So and projects for me take long time, and I'm not in a rush of making it. I feel like every work is sort of a statement, and that I like to craft very carefully. And I'm when I came, was a very long-term project, even though it didn't occur that the aftermath of Wanakerax is something I'm still digesting, you know. I mean, the crossing of the Andes was not a minor thing. It wasn't a little, and what I said, the crossing is the actual crossing, but also what it took us to get there. The years of development in that robot. So I'm still resonating with a lot of those ideas. I'm trying to imagine what comes after such an odyssey. What I'm working right now is something completely new for me. I'm making a feature film, which is based on the action of Wanakerax, but it's a different, in a way, it's a different thing. But because it's a feature film, which is something I've never done. And I take projects like that if they are challenging, and if they are pushing me to think in a different direction. And I feel like, you know, for the last year I've been working this film, and it's been absorbing me everything, because I'm it's very different than doing a video installation. And so I'm writing a script, and I'm doing all those kind of things that I've never done before, and I'm very engaged with what that could bring me, actually. And so we're finishing now in the next few weeks, and after that it's like a surprise about what's going to happen with that, because again, it's a very different field. Even though we might think, oh no, I mean, why not? Like, you make a film, but it does feel a different feel altogether, a different discipline. And so we'll see. That's what I'm working right now, and in crafting what I wanted it to say with that film, that it was not a video essay, that it was not a video installation, and that it learns from Guanaqueras and talk about the experience of crossing the Andes, but not in the sense that the robot does, right? Or not in the sense that all the materials, because Guanaqueras is it's a multi-platform thing. There's a robot, there's the crossing, there's the archival material, there's the installation. But I wanted this to be something different, so I had to create a character. I had to shape a different kind of practice, and I'm still working on that and thinking about what next robot could exist. But that for me has never been an easy question, and it's never. It takes me some time. Then in the meantime, I could do other projects, but to come up with the next robot is something that I never rush.
Right. That's exciting, but no, that's great, because good things take time, right? As well. Renee, yeah.
Yeah. So going back a little bit to the Robocalypse. There we go. I also find it apocalypse. I always find that word really interesting, because in reality it means revelation. Like, we have, through cultural assimilation, turned it into this like thing about associating with, the end of the world and all these things. But going back to robots and this bringing of the end, and the thing you mentioned about sci-fi and robots being this thing from that we'd fantasized for so long, it's also interesting to see how that has changed in a way, and it's become a lot more organic. Like, our robots now are becoming more human, right? Like, if you look at what is it? Oh my god, Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner 2049, I believe it is, where you have this supposedly artificial human that's falling in love with this artificial intelligence, right? That hires a prostitute to embody her And so these wind or hair, for example, I don't know if you remember this movie with Joaquin Phoenix, right, where he falls in love.
Yeah, I haven't watched it, but I know.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because now it's happening in real life. Like, again, real life caught up to that. Now we have people marrying their AI agents. So it is a constant evolution and a chasing of this next stage, right? And when you hear like the techno overlords of today, they seem to think of the singularity as this way for them to achieve immortality and becoming this new form of life that's above humanity. And I don't know, do you feel that resonates through your work, or is this like the thing that you're pushing against?
Well, I'm thinking a lot about ideas of revolution, and I'm very interested in the paradox of between technological revolution and political revolutions, and how those things seems to be like incompatible somehow, right? And so about how we're using the same word. And so through emancipatory revolutions, for example, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking that these robots can be part of an emancipatory revolution. That's why if they ally with those other than humans, and that's kind of the statement in the manifesto, right? What if we think revolution, technological revolution, not in the way that the techno gurus will think about it, but in the original sense of political revolution, right? That is always related to ideas of emancipation. And which is not a minor thing if you're thinking about robots which are enslaved machines. And so those ideas are there. I'm not, so it's just a matter of putting them together. And I think the work that I'm trying to do, this new work, like Guanaquerax, started with that question. And not that I want to cross the Andes. That's like the excuse to make this huge technological endeavor. But the origins from that, it was to trace the emancipatory journey that the people in my hometown did to actually liberate Argentina, Chile, and Peru from a Spanish colony. So how we tie this ideas of advancement, technological advancement, like such a, like a revolutionary technological thing as crossing the Andes, but for the purpose of emancipation in that case, right? So how we could start imagining these things coming together. And I think that's what that work does, or at least ask us to think and putting together those questions. And so not just think that a technological revolution has not to be related to ideas of emancipatory revolution or rebellions. And so I think the idea of rebellion is there in robotics. Every single robot tries to rebel, at least in science fiction. And we need to use that in our advancement and to bring it back, because I think those are political questions what the science fiction movies are asking, only that of course is in the sense of an evil, right? They're rebelling like any other oppressed subject, and it's changing the status quo in that sense, and it's seen obviously by those are the oppressors as something bad, but not necessarily if we stand on their side, right?
Well, the oppressor always fears that the oppressed will oppress
And that's the
them,
same
right?
story. So robots are just another incarnation of those that are oppressed and that have been crafted, created, and put as depressed by the oppressor. So I think that those narratives are there. I'm just trying to be more conscious about that and making work that speaks directly to that without being explicit, like the Guanaquerax is.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
preachy,
exactly.
right?
And I think it's just their invitations to think otherwise. I mean, that's it.
Yeah, and this also takes me back to two episodes that we've done. The first one is the solar punk episode, where we talk about, I don't know if you're familiar with the term solar punk.
I'm not sure.
So solar punk, like, have you heard of steampunk?
Yes.
So it's pretty much the same, but instead of using gas and steam, it uses solar power, renewables. It's sustainable, supposedly. Yeah. Well, not supposedly. That's the aim of that. So in a way, your work fits really well into this these values of solar punk, right? Like the creating of a better social life through the use of sustainable, responsible application of technology. And it can be robots, it can be solar panels that are integrated into houses. But it's interestingly also kind of like a step back in the dependence of certain technologies, which we should do, because the way we're functioning now with, for example, phones every year, like nobody needs a new phone every year, right? But we created this system where we have to get the new phone every year. And people are starting to push back. Now you see headlines where it's like, oh, Americans are hurting the economy because they're not renewing their phone every year. That was on Bloomberg last month. So I do feel that if we're looking at ways of pushing forward into using and not falling into anarcho-primitivism, which has its huge, massive problems, right? But to finding a way out of the current situation we're in, I think solar punk is one of them. And the other episode is an episode that we called Beige Dystopia, which is this idea that we are already in the dystopias that we see in science fiction. It's just that it doesn't have the aesthetics of dystopic fiction, and so it managed to slip past us. And that was a really fun episode, I think. I think it was really interesting, like all the realizations that we had. And again, it's linked to cyberpunk, to steampunk, to solar punk, and all these ways that technology kind of takes us into these weird spaces. So yeah, I think I see a lot of those conversations happening in your work as well.
And I think Paula's work really imagines or demands, it asks us to reimagine a future in which we can think of technology in different ways, right? And I think that's the power and about revolution also, right? It's thinking through these things which we're not accustomed to, which we don't see. And I think that's how your work is so powerful for, for the viewer, right? Because you get to think of materials in a different way. You get to think of embodied practices in a different way, epistemologies, mestizaje, all of these things. So it's very exciting to have you in our episode and for you to be the keynote speaker to the symposium, right?
Thank you so much.
Of course.
It's a pleasure, and I'm excited to be there in Arizona to talking to people and answer more questions and share more.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, that's. I think it's a well-earned position for you, being the keynote speaker, and I mean this conference, which you should all know and you should go to and attend. I think we still have tickets, right?
Yeah, we still do. It'll be in the Mesa, Arizona, at the center of Arizona State University as well. And this will be, let's see, full conference. It starts March, the early week of March. So if you still have a chance to register, please do so now and go check out Paula and all the fantastic work and symposia that will be exhibited there as well.
And you will be warm.
And you will be warm. Yes.
Like New York in February. Yeah, so I think this is a good point to jump off. First of all, I want to thank you, Paula, for taking the time to talk to us and share your work, your thoughts, and all the cool things that you brought up today. And on behalf of New Media Caucus, I want to thank you for also being our keynote speaker. Constanza?
Yes, thank you so much. It's always been a pleasure talking to you and finally having the opportunity to get this, live and, posting this will be excellent, I think. And to have our viewers, get an inside, look into your work and your trajectory, I think is really exciting. So thank you so much for coming here today.
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate a lot the conversation, and I hope to be in touch soon.
Of course.
Thanks again.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Okay, so now we move on to the closing real quick. First of all, we have to celebrate that this is our 12th episode of our 3rd season. So meaning that next month, it's our 4th year with you, and that we want to thank you all for listening, for liking, for subscribing. We want to thank the New Media Caucus itself for helping us get like this really nice setup that we now have, so we don't sound like we're recording in a bathroom. And also, well, I want to hope that we continue to grow. So, share your comments, engage with us, reach out to us if you have it. And this is also an invitation to you, Paula. If you ever want to do an episode, or you want to talk to someone and create like a little episode or a long episode, you're more than welcome. This is an open invitation to everyone in the field. Or if you know someone that you think we should talk to for example, these icebreaker episodes, that would be fantastic. With all that said, do you want to say anything else, Connie?
No, take it away.
All right, then. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.